The open ocean at night is the loneliest place on Earth. You can stand on the deck of a massive cruise ship, surrounded by 3,000 sleeping souls, and still feel like the last person alive. Because when the moon disappears behind a bank of clouds and the black water stretches out in every direction with no land in sight, the ship becomes its own floating world, a world with no escape. The crew who work these vessels know this better than anyone. They trade stories below the waterline, in cramped mess halls and engine rooms, about the impossible things that happen between ports. The passenger who vanishes from a locked interior cabin and is never seen again. The child's laughter that drifts through an empty theater at 3 in the morning. The face that appears in a porthole when the ship is 100 miles from the nearest shore. Tonight, you're going to hear 3 absolutely terrifying true accounts from real cruise ship staff, a cabin steward, a deckhand, and a lounge singer who each witnessed something that shattered their understanding of reality. These aren't ghost stories invented to scare tourists. These are the moments that made hardened seafarers refuse to set foot on certain decks ever again. The ocean keeps its secrets, and the deepest ones are not buried in the water. They walk the corridors while you sleep. If you've ever booked an inside cabin, if you've ever stood on your balcony and peered into the dark, you might want to hold on to something solid. This voyage is about to get very, very dark. If you're brave enough to sail with me until the final wave crashes, smash that like button, subscribe with all notifications, and drop a comment right now saying I'm staying on dry land. Now step aboard. The first story begins. I had been working as a cabin steward on the Coral Princess for 18 months, running the interior stateroom corridor on Deck 9. And by then I thought I had seen every kind of mess a passenger could make. But nothing prepared me for the couple in cabin B417. A middle-aged husband and wife from Texas who boarded in Fort Lauderdale on July 8th for a 10-night Eastern Caribbean itinerary, and from the very first evening, there was something off about the way the wife, Mrs. Delacroix, would stand in the doorway and watch me work, never blinking, never speaking, just watching with this small, frozen smile that didn't reach her eyes, while the husband, a big man with a booming laugh, kept apologizing for her, saying she was just fascinated by the ship and had always been a bit peculiar. And I smiled back because hospitality is hospitality, and I had seen far stranger behavior on the high seas. But on the third night out, I was doing turn-down service around 9 p.m. when I noticed that the connecting door between B417 and the empty cabin next door, B419, which was supposed to be dead-bolted from both sides because nobody had booked it, was standing slightly ajar. And a cold draft slipped through, heavy with the smell of salt and something else. Something metallic and organic like the inside of a bait bucket. And I knocked on B417 to tell them I needed to secure the door, but nobody answered, which was strange because I had just seen the Delacroix heading to dinner not 20 minutes before. So I stepped inside to pull the door shut, and that's when I saw it. The entire wall above the bed in B419 was covered in handwriting. Tiny cramped letters scrawled in what looked like dark red lipstick, the same phrase repeated over and over. The sea knows my name, the sea knows my name, the sea knows my name, and my heart started pounding as I backed out and locked the connecting door from B417's side with my master key, telling myself it was some prank by a previous passenger that housekeeping had missed. And I finished my shift and went to my own cabin and tried to sleep. But at 3:17 a.m., my cabin phone rang, an internal call, and when I picked it up, all I heard was the sound of underwater breathing. the slow gurgle of someone trying to speak with lungs full of seawater, and then a woman's voice. "Hollow and distant," said Casey. "You locked me out, and the line went dead." And the caller ID showed the extension for cabin B419, which had no phone because it was empty. And I threw on my uniform and ran to deck 9, and the door of B419 was now wide open. The lights flickering and the handwriting on the wall had changed. It now read, "Mrs. Delacroix is already home." And when I sprinted to B417 and let myself in, the cabin was pristine, the bed still turned down. The towel animal I'd folded that evening, a swan, sitting on the pillow with its cloth neck twisted completely backward. And the Delacroix' passports and wallets were still in the safe, but there was no sign of the couple. And the balcony door was locked from the inside. And I called a code Delta for a missing passenger, and security swarmed the deck. And the security footage showed Mr. and Mrs. Delacroix returning to their cabin at 10:42 p.m., entering together and never coming out. But when we searched the cabin a second time, we found a wedding photograph tucked under the mattress, old and yellowed and brittle, showing a young bride and groom on the deck of a ship that looked exactly like the Coral Princess, but dated 1962, and the bride had the same frozen smile as Mrs. Delacroix. And the groom's face was blurred, smeared, as if the photograph itself had been soaked in salt water and the emulsion was dissolving. And the chief security officer, a former Royal Navy man who had seen everything, went pale and whispered something to the captain. And the captain ordered the connecting door to be 419 sealed with a steel plate. Welded shut, and I was reassigned to a different deck, and I tried to forget. But on the last night of the cruise, I was walking past deck 9 on a different errand, and I heard wet footsteps behind me, squelching. And I turned, and there was Mrs. Delacroix standing at the end of the corridor, her evening gown dripping, her hair plastered to her skull, and she smiled that terrible smile and raised her hand, and her lips moved. And though no sound came out, I could read the words perfectly. "The sea knows my name." And then she stepped sideways through the wall into B419, which was still welded shut, and the carpet where she had stood was dry, bone dry, but it smelled of brine and that metallic bait bucket stench, and I never worked a cruise ship again, and to this day I will not book any cabin numbered 419 on any vessel on any ocean, because I know that the sea keeps a passenger manifest that has nothing to do with tickets, and some cabins are never truly empty. They are just waiting for the right guest to come home. The Aurora Dawn was a mid-sized cruise liner running the South Pacific Circuit Fiji, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, and I joined her as a junior deckhand when I was 23, all suntan lotion and eagerness. And the first thing the old bosun, a leather-skinned Kiwi named Hemi, told me was, "Stay off the forward observation deck after midnight, no matter what you hear." And of course I laughed it off because sailors are superstitious by nature, and I thought it was just a hazing ritual for the new kid. But then on the 8th of July, we were sailing from Port Vila to Noumea, under a moon so bright it turned the sea to mercury, and my shift ended at 11, and I was walking the outer promenade on deck 7, when I heard it, a foghorn sounding from directly ahead of the ship. A long, mournful blast that shouldn't have been possible because the radar showed nothing, but open water for 300 nautical miles. And I leaned over the railing and squinted into the night, and I saw it. A second ship running parallel to us about half a mile to starboard. An old-fashioned steamliner with 2 funnels and rows of glowing portholes. and she was listing slightly. And the oddest thing was that she made no wake. No sound except that foghorn, and I blinked and she was gone, just vanished like a candle snuffed. And I told myself it was a reflection. A trick of moonlight on mist. But when I got back to the crew quarters, Hemi was waiting for me and he said, "You saw her, didn't you, the Aurora star? She went down in 1962 with all hands. But she still does the run. And anyone who sees her 3 times," didn't finish the sentence, just tapped the wooden door frame and walked away. And for the next 3 nights I couldn't sleep. I kept volunteering for the midnight watch just so I could be on deck looking for that ghost ship. And on the 3rd night, July 11th, she appeared again, closer this time. So close, I could see figures moving on her decks. Shadow passengers in old-fashioned clothes, dancing in a ballroom that glowed with chandelier light. And I heard faint music, a waltz, drifting across the water. A scratchy gramophone waltz, and one of the figures stopped dancing and walked to the railing and looked directly at me. And it was a young woman in a white dress, and she raised her arm and pointed, not at me, but at something behind me. And I spun around, and there was nothing there. Nothing but the empty promenade. But when I turned back, the Aurora star was so close, I could have thrown a line to her. And the woman was still pointing, and now I could see her face. And it was my face, my own face, on a stranger's body. My eyes, my jawline, but twisted into an expression of pure terror, and she mouthed a single word. 3, and the ghost ship vanished for the 2nd time. And I ran straight to Hemi's cabin and woke him and told him everything. And he sat up in his bunk and rubbed his eyes and said, "You need to leave this ship at New Meliters. Don't wait for the end of your contract. Don't even pack. Just go." And I would have done it. I swear I would have. But that morning, the captain announced an outbreak of norovirus, and we were denied port entry, forced to stay at sea for another 3 days, and on the 6th night, the night of July 14th, I was on the bridge assisting the navigation officer when every electronic instrument on the console flickered and died. GPS, radar, radio, all of it just blinked out. And the officer was cursing and rebooting systems when I looked out the bridge window and the Aurora star was directly ahead, 300 meters off the bow. And this time there was no music and no dancing and no passengers. The ship was dark, except for one single porthole on the bridge level. And in that porthole stood the woman in the white dress. And she was no longer pointing. She was holding up 3 fingers. And I felt a cold hand clamp around my wrist. Not a human hand. Something with too many joints and a grip like iron. I looked down and there was nothing there. Nothing visible. But the pressure was real, and it was pulling me toward the bridge door. And I screamed, and the navigation officer grabbed me, and the instruments surged back online, and the ghost ship was gone. And I looked at my wrist, and there were bruises. Deep purple, finger-shaped bruises that took weeks to fade. And I got off the ship in Numia as soon as they let us dock, and I never went back to sea. But about a year later, I got a letter from Hemi, just a single page torn from an old maritime registry, and it listed the crew of the Aurora star. Lost. July 14th, 1962, and there, halfway down the list, was a junior deckhand named T. O'Sullivan. And the description matched me exactly: height, hair color, even a small scar on the left eyebrow that I've had since I was a child, and at the bottom of the page Hemi had scrawled, She always takes a replacement. You were the third to see her. She won't stop until the roster is full again. And I now live in Alice Springs, as far from the ocean as you can get in Australia. And I still wake up some nights with the smell of salt in my nostrils and the sound of a waltz crackling into silence. And I check my wrists for bruises. And sometimes they are there, fresh and purple, as if something invisible is still holding on, still counting, still waiting for me to see her one last time. The Celestial Empress was a grand old dame of a ship, all polished brass and Art Deco chandeliers, and I had the privilege of singing in the Crystal Ballroom every evening. A residency that was supposed to run from June through September with a full orchestra and a repertoire of classics from the 40s and 50s, and on the 8th of July, a Tuesday, I was walking back to my crew cabin on deck 2 after a particularly exhausting set when I passed the Royal Spa and noticed that the door was slightly ajar and a pale blue light pulsed from inside. And I knew the spa should have been locked and dark because the spa manager, a meticulous German woman named Greta, checked the doors herself every night at 9 p.m., and it was now well past midnight. So I pushed the door open and the light was coming from the main pool, the thalassotherapy pool. And the water was glowing, actually glowing with its own bioluminescent shimmer. And sitting on the edge of the pool with her bare feet dangling in the glowing water was a little girl in an old-fashioned sailor dress, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with blonde ringlets and a large blue hair ribbon. And she turned to me and smiled and said, "Will you sing the song my mummy sang? I've been waiting for someone to sing it for ever so long." And I should have been frightened, but there was something so earnest and lonely in her voice that I sat down on a deck and asked her what song she meant. And she hummed a few bars. A few notes of You Are My Sunshine, but slower. Sadder, and I recognized it immediately, and I sang it softly, there in the dark spa with the glowing pool. And when I finished, the little girl clapped her hands, a sound like dry leaves rustling, and said, "Mummy will be so happy. She's been crying since the ship hit the rock. Can you sing it again tomorrow?" And then she just dissolved, not like a ghost disappearing in a puff, but like mist burning off a morning field. And the pool stopped glowing, and the spa was dark and silent and locked from the outside. And I ran to my cabin and didn't sleep a wink. And the next morning I asked Greta if any children had ever drowned in the spa. And her face tightened, and she said, "The Celestial Empress has never lost a passenger." But the way she said it, too fast, too rehearsed, told me she was lying. So I went to the ship's archive in the library and started digging through old newspapers and passenger manifests. And after 3 hours I found it, July 8th, 1962, the Celestial Empress, on her maiden voyage, had struck an uncharted rock off the coast of Cornwall and limped into port with a gash in her hull. And while the official report listed only minor injuries, local newspaper clipping from the Penzance Gazette reported that a 7-year-old girl named Florence had gone missing during the evacuation, last seen in the spa area where she had been waiting for her mother. And her body was never recovered, and the article included a photograph, grainy and faded, of a little girl in a sailor dress with a large white-haired ribbon. And I felt my stomach drop into the earth's core because the ribbon in the photograph was white. But the ribbon I had seen was blue. The article explained that the mother had promised to buy her a blue ribbon for her birthday, which was 2 weeks after the sinking, and I realized that Florence was still waiting, not just for her mother, but for the song and the ribbon and all the things she had been promised and never received. And that night, I couldn't bring myself to go back to the spa, but when I performed my set in the Crystal Ballroom, I chose "You Are My Sunshine" as my closing number. And as I sang, I scanned the audience, and there, standing at the very back of the ballroom, half hidden behind a velvet curtain, it's a woman in a 1960s cocktail dress holding the hand of a little girl with a blue ribbon, and both of them were smiling. And then they weren't there, just the curtain moving slightly as if someone had brushed past it. And after the show, I found a napkin on my piano stool, a cloth napkin with the ship's original 1962 logo. And written on it in fountain pen ink that was still wet were the words, "Thank you for the song. Mummy says we can go now, and I have that napkin framed in my flat in London. Every year on July 8th I sing 'You Are My Sunshine' alone in my living room. Every year at exactly midnight I hear a soft splash and a child's delighted giggle, and I know that somewhere, on a ship that no longer sails, a little girl is still waiting by a glowing pool, but now she knows the song. And she knows someone remembered, and that is enough to keep her smiling until the sea finally calls her home." And there we have it, 3 voyages into the unexplainable. 3 crew members who boarded ordinary cruise ships and disembarked with stories that will follow them to their graves. The ocean is vast beyond comprehension, and even the largest cruise liner is just a speck of light floating on an endless, indifferent darkness. These stories prove that some things slip through the cracks between what we understand and what we can never understand. The phantom passenger who still occupies a welded shut cabin, the ghost ship that circles the South Pacific looking for a replacement crew, the little girl who waited 60 years for someone to sing her mother's lullaby. These aren't fairy tales. They are the moments that happen between ports. In the silent hours when even the crew are asleep and the ship belongs to the sea and whatever else calls it home. So next time you're on a cruise and you hear a soft knock on your cabin door at 3 a.m., or you see a face in your balcony reflection that isn't yours, or you catch the faint sound of an old waltz drifting through the ventilation shaft, don't investigate. Just pull your covers tighter and remember, you are a guest on that ship. But some passengers checked in a long time ago, and they have no intention of ever checking out. If these salt-soaked nightmares kept you anchored to your seat, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another journey into the terrifying unknown. And comment below with the story that scared you most. Was it the locked cabin, the ghost ship with your own face, or the little girl by the glowing pool? I read every single comment, and your engagement is the wind in these horror sails. Thank you for sailing with me into the dark. Until next time, stay on dry land if you can.